What was the situation where you thought, duck, I'm going to be fired for sure? I work on a production line manager of quite expensive toys. In the middle of the process, we noticed that we used wrong material and stopped the line. Everybody was freaking out that we're all going to be fired and they're going to charge us for this and so on. There were ideas how to fix it without anybody noticing it. I've made a very hard decision to be completely open with my superiors, our cooperators, and our customer. I described in details how we found out about mistake, how we double verified it was truly wrong material, and so on. My superior gave me promotion. Our cooperators found they have some holes in the system that allowed to mark the material not properly and fixed it. Our customer was not happy about delay, but also impressed with quality control and transparent information that we provided. Story 2. Recently, actually. I work in phone support for a big business, and I was still learning the phone system. We have two different types of call transfer button. Consult, which means you place the caller on hold and go first so you can fill in another agent blind, which means you just send the person to a random boss working the floor that day. Rules state we have to consult every call and never blind transfer, or else we will get in a lot of trouble. Anyway, we are all taking calls, and I get this customer who is just not having the greatest of days and has decided the best way to deal with his day is yelling at somebody who literally just can't help him solve his problem. We're going around in circles on the phone. I'm getting my ass verbally handed to me, and I can't hang up on the guy because company policy, so when he asks to speak to my manager, I oblige and open the phone book, hover over the department manager's name and click, blind? No, why fingers? Why? All of a sudden, the big boss, the manager of the manager's phone, begins to ring and screaming on the inside, no, no, no. The big boss is looking around as he picks up the phone, sees my look of complete horror, and picks it up. I'm sitting there, getting another call, trying not to look over at him. But after 5 minutes, he's finished and starts walking over to me, and I'm like, well, I had a job. And he pats me on my shoulder and says, your face is priceless right now, and walks off. He didn't care. My office team still make fun of me for that. Story 3. Worked in the oil field for a while. One of the plant operators would sleep all day, for some reason, in his office chair, with his head on the desk. One day, some of the higher-ups walked into the room. I was pretty sure he was about to get fired. Without skipping a beat, he said, in Jesus' name, amen, and then stood up to greet everybody. The boss nodded his approval, and they all started talking about the plant. The guy got caught sleeping on the job and managed to look good doing it. Story 4. Worked as a research assistant while in college. My boss worked with mice brains and gave me a couple practice ones to learn how to slice and mount them onto microscope slides. Eventually, she let me move on to the real thing. She literally said, this brain is really important. I've been working on experiments with this mouse for 6 months. In my anxious state, I dropped it down the drain with the water running. She was not happy in the slightest, but didn't fire me at least. Story 5. I am a teacher. I broke up a fight. To break up the fight, I had to punch a kid in his stomach. He was on the ground, gasping for air while I pulled him off the other kid. Story 6. I messed up some details on a project and they called me in. I thought I was in some crap. They're like, you sound a little off today. You mind going home? Employees don't want to catch anything. I'm just like, duck yeah. It was awesome. And I went home and slept and slept and slept and slept. Story 7. A colleague who had just been told he was going to be made redundant sent out a duck you email to a wide slew of the customer base and staff, then trashed our development as 400. Yes, I'm an old guy. He did it by logging on remotely, using my login details. 2 months of suspension, suspicion, investigation, and me crapping myself until it was finally tracked it down to him. They apologized, gave me a pay rise, and asked me not to seek recourse with him as it was in the hands of the police. He and I discussed it about 2 years later. It was a short conversation. Story 8. I was a cooking instructor for a camp. Kids lied to me about not being religious to eat something besides the vegan menu. They walked up to me later, saying that it was nice to break the laws of their religion. Story 9. I, 16F at the time, used to work at this fancy pet store for rich people. They could come in and pay to wash their dogs in this side room. And the benefit was that we cleaned up all the hairy mess. I loved cleaning it because if there was not someone waiting, I could spend half an hour in there, making it super clean, and it would help time pass by. One day, a costumer F came in with her dog, can't recall the type, but it was big, and proceeded to use the wash. I was working with just me and my manger, 50-ish F at time, so I went in to clean the dog wash. I couldn't reach over the big metal tub very well, so I had to use a step stool to reach in. There was a hose attached to the wall, so I would rinse all the hair into this hair catcher thing by the drain, and then place the hose back onto the wall. I did this and cleaned out the hair and then went on to dry it with the dryer hose. The hose was super load, and this was the time-consuming part. After approximately 15 minutes, because I like my alone time, the tub was completely dry, and I stepped off my step stool to a finished job. When I stepped off the stool, I stepped into about 3 inches of water because I hadn't turned the hose off all the way and it had been leaking the whole time. I started panicking and used the guest towels to push as much water into the floor drain as I could. But the towels were no match for this tsunami I made. I frantically went outside in search of more towels, pushing a decent amount of water out of the room when I opened the door. And lo and behold, my manager was there with a customer waiting for the dog wash. I chilled and slyly walked over to where she was standing to grab the towels from under the counter. "Is the dog wash ready?" "Me, 1 sec." I went back in there, but the towels were no use. Defeated, I walked back out to my manager and tell her the truth. Well, slightly the truth, not really the truth, but it's her truth now. Manager name. "You will not believe what happened. The guest before left the hose on and flooded the room, and I've been trying to clean it the whole time, but the towels are no use." She goes, "I knew that lady was no good. Let me see the room." So we go over to the room, and she is appalled, and the audacity of the guest, and obviously I am pretending to be as well. She goes, "She was trying to flood the whole store." And I'm like, what are we gonna do? This genius whips out a squeegee and blesses me with the gift and squeegeeing this water into a drain. I do everything with the guilt eating me alive, but get it done for the guest. My manager complains about the guests flooding the store for the rest of the night. And each time I think she's just trying to get me to confess. The next morning, I go into work super worried that someone would look at the security tapes, and while there were no cameras in the dog room, you could see me go in for 30 minutes, and then water starting to drip out during that time. I'm ready to confess my guilt and ask for forgiveness, because my manager and I were opening together. When I get there, she is already there on a phone with a manager at another location. Other manager name, "You will not believe what happened last night. A guest tried to flood our whole damn store, but my name fixed everything. I guess I never got caught, but I should have been fired, so I hope it still counts." Story 10. First day at my first job out of uni. I pushed my code changes straight on to develop. I landed a great gig as a junior software developer at one of the very few studios in my city and was loving it, but got distracted when pushing some code. Instead of my feature branch, Develop suddenly had this untested bit of fresh graduate muck all over it. I was freaking out thinking they were going to fire me and give me a fine or something, but they were really chill and understanding about it all. Never made another Git mistake again though. Story 11. I was a teacher, accidentally said the word in front of the students since they were provoking me. None of the students bothered reporting it to the principal. I felt like I was pretty lucky. Story 12. Kind of the opposite. I had booked a few vacation days to help my mom move to Florida. While in Florida, employer called me 6 days before I was scheduled to be home and said they needed me the next day, no exception. That was 1,600 miles that they wanted me to drive non-stop for a 4-hour shift in the afternoon the next day. I made the trip. I worked my shift. Then they fired me after my shift for no apparent reason. Found out later that my boss did this on purpose to prove a point to some fresh blue blood employees. I was livid, but there was nothing I could have done. However, the employer was a now former friend of my mom's and all of her retired bridge club friends. After the news got out that she had made me drive 24 hours at the drop of a hat simply to fire me, which incidentally cost my mom $500 in mover's fees to finish the move that I wasn't able to. She lost enough of her local patrons that she couldn't sustain the business and filed for bankruptcy less than a year later. Story 13. I had a manager who was a creep through and through. He was sleeping with at least 3 of the girls in work and heavily pursuing the other women in work. He also had a habit of taking days off with one of those girls, Jay, to smoke all day. He was also married to a woman working in another branch of our restaurant in the city center. I worked for 6 months in another county, and R managed to get the branch of our restaurant there to agree to take me part-time while I worked my work placement for uni, unpaid work placement. When I got back early, I texted R if I could get my job back a month early. He replied, "Sure, no problem. How would you like to repay me?" And I replied, "I'll get you a pint sometime." And he responded, "Oh, you sure you can't thank me another way?" And I simply replied, "What?" Because I had no interest in having his short, chubby, sweaty, married body on me. He replied, "NVM," and I thought that was that. Hell nah. When I started again, he was a dog. He was super rude to me and took any chance he could to mug me off, up to and including texting me 5 minutes before an opening shift, "Ex-manager's covering for me today, and Y's covering for Jay. They'll be in late though, so you'll have to mind the shop till then." I wasn't even a manager and not able to start up the system. He'd then shout at me for not knowing how to start up the system. Dude had the gall to shout at me when he was clearly taking the day off to smoke and duck a girl that wasn't his wife. One day I snapped though. I had found out my eyes were bad and needed glasses, wore them in, and he kept ragging on them, telling me the style I picked was ugly for my face, telling me to make sure I clean them because they look filthy. I was a pizza girl. Pizza dust gets everywhere. Glasses are bound to get dirty. and telling me to get contacts because they glasses were awful, all in a very judgmental, condescending voice. One day he calls me, "Where are you?" At home? Turns out he changed the roster midway through the week and didn't tell anyone or post it on our private FB page. He shouts at me for not checking if it's been changed and tells me to come in. I say fine, but that I wouldn't do it again unless I was rostered and told about the roster. He hung up without responding to that. When I get there, it's pretty busy but manageable, and he shouts, "Give me the thing!" pointing at nothing in particular. I grab the card machine, seeing as it's beside me, and he's at a till, so I presume he's taking a payment. "No, the thing." And I simply say, "What thing? You could be pointing at anything." And he sighs and says, "You really need to get your money back from the cowboys at Specsavers, because clearly you're still ducking blind with those things." He keeps at it with the glasses, making snide comments and being snippy. I just duck and cracked, slammed the trays I was cleaning down on the counter and shouted, "Taking my break!" Clocked out and cried for like 15 minutes in the bathroom. When I was done, I went out, "Hey, R, I feel sick, so I'm going home. Bye." And I walked out of the shop. The next shift I had, he called me into his office. That was the point. I was sure I was going to be fired. But he just gave me a warning, with Jay beside him. Turns out only one manager can be present when giving a warning. So my warning was moot in the end, thanks to my pal, who was a manager who was up to date on the policies. R ended up divorcing his wife when it turned out they were both serial cheating on each other. He knocked up like the first girl he hooked up with since then. Story 14. I worked at Wendy's when I was in high school. There was an area in the back that was open to the elements from the top, but walled in. In this area, there were doors on each side. One connecting to the back of the restaurant, one going out into the parking lot, one was to a storage room where cups and containers and straws and such were kept, and one went to the freezer where there were crates and crates of buns. The central area was used by the smokers for their breaks, but it was also where we would toss out bags of trash and empty boxes, and also set aside empty bun crates which would be collected by the bun delivery person when a new shipment came in. I was out in that central area during the late night shift hanging around with a fellow employee who was a smoker. I had with me for some reason a can of this Pam type stuff that was sprayed on the grill. And being a high schooler, I had the bright idea to use the can of spray to draw a gigantic junk onto the wall, testicles included. This thing was seriously massive. If you walk out of that door coming from the back of the restaurant, it was right there in your face and next to the door going out to the parking lot. Probably about 6 feet tall and equally wide. The wall was a light gray, and the giant member I had sprayed onto it was a darker gray, like the color it turned when it rained. I also had the bright idea that I could use one of my friend's lighters to burn it right back off of the wall. It did not work that way. It stayed. I went inside and got degreaser and other cleaners to try to scrub it off, but it just stayed. I was freaking out trying to figure out what I could do to get rid of the junk. I thought I would for sure be fired. I was on the late night shift, and it was somewhere around 1 a.m., and the night manager hadn't seen it. I used stacks of the crates that the buns were shipped to us on to cover it up. But I knew the next day they would be moved, and eventually it would come out that I was the one who left the gigantic junk on the wall, and I would surely be fired. I genuinely liked the guy who was the big manager over the restaurant, and I felt so bad about doing something so stupid and immature and having to face the music with him and disappoint him. I wrote a note to him apologizing and saying I would do whatever it took to get that giant junk off of that wall and left it in the office for him. I also worked the lunch shift the next day and knew he would be there. My friend was just laughing through the whole ordeal. I sweated it out all night. I don't think I slept at all. And at 11 a.m. came to work fully prepared to be fired on the spot. I beat the manager there, and I went to the back and was surprised to see the giant junk was completely gone. The whole area was empty. The bun crates had been taken away, and the part of the wall where I had left my artwork was perfectly clear, just like it was before I had defiled it. I quickly ran into the office before the manager got there and threw away the envelope I had left for him with his name on it, and continued on like nothing was ever wrong. The only thing I could think of was that maybe that Pam-type substance had absorbed into the wall overnight. Maybe it continued through the wall, and then sometime later there was a gigantic junk on the other side facing cars going through the drive-thru. Probably not. But to this day, every time I think about doing something that might get me in trouble, I think about how horrified I was of losing my burger flipping job due to becoming asso just to get a laugh out of my dumb friend. Story 15. I just started my apprenticeship in a hotel and was maybe there for 3 or 4 months. Up until the 6th month, they can fire you for any reason. They don't even need to give you one. After the 6th month trail, you really need to duck up for them to be able to fire you. That day I was working with the manager of the banquet department. We finished our work around 2 hours into our shift and got bored. He then had the great idea of chilling on the rooftop and get some beer food on. I was hesitant because I was new, but hey, he is the manager. I will just go. I had nothing to do anyways. We grabbed another apprentice and went to the roof. The 2 guys had maybe 4 to 5 beers while I was drinking Coke. I always hid their bottles behind a wall in case someone would come up. All of a sudden, we see 2 policemen, 2 security guys from the hotel, and our duty manager get on the roof. We all just froze. Police tells us people called saying there are people doing suspicious things on the roof, and due to it being next to the airport, they needed to investigate in case of terrorism. They took our names and checked our data and left. Duty manager had to write a report on what happened. I was sure I could pack my bags. Next day followed. I got called into HR, and they told me that I ducked up. I was like, yeah, I know. I was ready to get fired. They gave me a warning letter, and I left. Story 16. Backstory. The state I live in is at will, so they can terminate us for any reason. On top of that, I was a contract to hire. We had it scheduled so that I would work the week before Christmas because a lot of people were not working the last 2 weeks. We had to have 2 people at a minimum, and it's a very safety-oriented job. That weekend, before I worked, I bought a TV for my mom on sale for Xmas. I brought it home, almost got in a wreck, but managed to avoid it and honked at the idiot. Got home, unboxed TV, set it on the floor, and hooked it up to her DVR. She liked it, and I went to disconnect it so that I can put it in the box and install it the next day. As I walked towards it, I had socks on. I walked over the rug, and the first step I took on the laminate caused me to slip. Tried to stop myself and grabbed a hold of the new TV. Since it was a flat TV and just sitting on the floor, it started to fall. With my left hand on the TV and it at an angle, I braced my fall with my right hand on the floor at the same time my chin hit the top of the TV. My right wrist broke and folded onto my arm. All I remember is a boom, impact on chin, and a cat fight. My mom screaming as she saw it happen. Her reaction was to straighten out my wrist and yell at me. Anyways, I texted my manager as we got ready to go to the urgent care and told him what happened. Next day, the boss called and said he heard what happened. I thought I was getting let go because now I can't do my job safely and I'm a contractor who will miss work. He said to take the week off and come back on the 2nd of the new year and we will figure something out. I had also emailed my hiring agent and informed him the night of the incident. He called me after New Year's and was like, I have no idea what the duck you're doing, but they must love you. I called them and they said they're going to move you to the office for database management. I've never seen this before. Another time, before the job from above, I used to detail cars for the auction and did not pay attention to the dually truck while pulling into the garage. The dually hit the side of the doorway and cracked. This was a custom painted truck, and I was like, duck. My boss called the lot manager, his friend, and I was trembling. Manager comes up and looks at it and says, you're worried about this crap? He pulled up the panel, taped it with Scotch tape, made me get a can of regular black spray paint, and painted over the crack line. The paint job had some lines similar to that with random widths and whatnot, so he just made it look like it belonged there. He told his crew to make that the last vehicle and don't stop driving it through the auction. It sold and no one noticed. I thought I was going to be fired and have to pay like $1,500 plus just to fix that truck. Nothing came of it because all sales were final. Story 17. I let a guy walk out with about $50 worth of food because it was my second day and I had no idea how to ring up phone orders. Another time my drawer came up $10 short. I still don't know what happened, but I never heard anything about it after that day. Story 18. Had a horrible system at my fast food job where if a person took out their card too soon, the whole system would restart itself. It sucked. I usually told people to just go sit down and I'd get them when it restarted to pay. I did this and then promptly went on break and forgot I'd ever said anything. Order was around $50 and they never had to pay. Noticed my manager staring at the order and quickly turned right back around and was never confronted. Story 19. This was years ago before I had my kids. I worked for a small background check company doing motor vehicle reports, MVR, for potential employers to look at before they hire someone. I did specialized and manual MVRs that took extra steps to complete, and I was one of only 2 people in the entire company who knew how to do them. They required sending the potential employee a consent. For that, they are supposed to fill out and send back to me. I print, sign, get another employee to notarize, scan them back into my computer, and fax them to the state in question so I can access their records. Then, I had to wait a few days to get the records from the state and then process them. I had to remove anything from the records that wasn't pertinent or that was out of the time period for reportable offenses. I had to remove any personal information. Then I had to document everything and send it to the client. All in all, it took about a week to complete if they sent me their form right away, whereas normal MVRs took a few seconds. I was highly specialized. When I first got started, the client we were working for was up and coming and didn't know exactly what they wanted. Originally, I was not allowed to close any MVRs and remove them from my list unless they were completed and sent to the client or the employee emailed me back saying they were no longer interested. The people who never responded were to just stay on my list until the client decided what they wanted us to do with them. After a few months, those that stayed on my list added up like crazy, and I ended up with about 800 incomplete MVRs stuck there, cluttering my list. One day, my manager pulled me into the office and told me to close them all out if they had been there for more than a certain time. I said, "Okie dokie." I closed them all down. I was just a lowly desk working and still relatively new at the job, so I didn't know that the client still has to pay for closed MVRs. The state that I was working with took about $9 to request the MVRs. Surprise! The client was billed over $7,000 all at once for uncompleted MVRs with my name all over them. The client called the owner of the company and freaked out on them, and I and my direct manager were called into her office. What saved me was that I wrote "order closed due to no response" via manager's name, and my manager took the hit for it. Apparently, he misunderstood something that was said at their meeting. I was completely fine and in the clear. I spent the next 2 days reopening all of the previously closed orders. They sat on my list for a couple more weeks before the client gave us permission to close them all back again. I worked for them for a year longer before I quit when I went into labor at work. Story 20. Happened to my coworker. Does that count? We're relatively new hires in the same program at our company, flown to another city for training. The group of trainees is super social, so most nights we end up going out for drinks. On our last night before flying home, everyone goes out partying. Up until that night, my coworker, Jay, had been a very responsible drinker. But for whatever reason, he drank way too much that night. Total peach in public, but at 11 p.m. he slurred that he wanted to go home. Although somewhat drunk, I had a bad feeling, so myself and another trainee, H, took the lift home with him and got him to his room. At that point, he was totally sloshed and trying to go to sleep anywhere we sat down. Given that Jay had drank quite a lot and may throw up, H and I, two rather weak 22-year-old ladies, heaved and carried him to his bed and propped him on his side with a pillow. We sat there talking, and all of a sudden, Jay's throwing up. He's completely unconscious, but his body's ejecting everything he's ever eaten in his entire life. I'll spare the gory details, but he ruined the hotel bed sheets, mattress, and carpet before we could get a trash can in front of him. When he became semi-conscious and we got him to the bathroom, he managed to grab onto and break the ducking toilet, like shattered porcelain. We stayed up caring for him, moving him to H's hotel room so he had a non-soiled mattress to sleep on, and got a few hours of sleep. He was still drunk when he woke up, but was able to function autonomously. However, he got back to his hotel room and promptly fell back asleep, and H had to wake him back up. We were 20 minutes from having to be checked out and at our final morning of training. H is from a different company, so I sent her ahead of me. Even though I helped hustle Jay through packing everything to check out, he and I were late to training. He threw up again in front of the training building, and so I was told, just outside the actual training room. To summarize, the ruined mattress and carpet of a hotel broke a ducking toilet. Was late to our last day of training, which was very obvious given our class size of 40 and very frowned upon. Vomiting in the training building on a door legitimately would have asphyxiated if he and I had not been there. Keeping an eye on him, Jay was completely sure he would be fired. 100%. He had left his personal card details to pay for the damage, but thought he was a total goner. But literally nobody has spoken about it. I don't even think anyone told our manager. Dude has faced zero repercussion, besides his bruised pride, I think, given how apologetic he has been to me and H. Lucky guy. Story 21. Went joyriding in a work vehicle, think heavy-duty golf cart, and hit a jump and landed on the front of the vehicle. Broke the plastic and mangled the radiator. Buddy and I pushed it back and went to tell the boss. Told him we crashed into a stump and were really sorry, and he was just happy we told him, instead of parking it and not saying anything. Story 22. I work in a shipping receiving department for a company, and my coworker was working with a customer that needed 2 duplicate packages of parts for his machine. The customer wanted 1 next day air and 1 regular ground. My coworker had accidentally sent the first package regular ground instead of next day air. The customer called the next day, and I happened to be the one to pick up the phone, and he had asked where his package was. My coworker didn't want to admit that he had messed up, so I decided to cover for him and told the customer that there was a systematic error, and it looks like the package somehow got changed to ground. I assured him that we would contact our shipping services and redirect the package. He seemed to understand. My coworker and I came up with the idea that we could just send the second package with next day air and all will be good as new, like nothing happened. Man, were we wrong? The general manager contacted my coworker and said that, how can something like this happen? He then responded with, I'm not too sure how the system messed up like that. So the GM said that he had a friend that works for our shipping service, and that's when my coworker's heart dropped. It was a small pause, and then the GM said, Unfortunately, he's on vacation. That's when my coworker felt much better. When we had sent the next day air, our shipping service had lost our package, which delayed the ETA for the customer's package. When you, the customer, finally got the package, our shipping service was telling the customer about how they think that their supplier, my company, is being shady because the shipping dates don't match up. Calls my coworker again to confirm that they indeed got the package and everything is good. The GM also said what the shipping service had told him. Your supplier is being shady because the shipping dates don't match up. He also added, I know that the shipping service are the ones trying to be shady because they lost our package. All we can do is agree with him. Honestly, the scariest thing we could have done. It was a stressful 2 weeks. Story 23, old job. I was on really good terms with the people who owned the restaurant at the office. When they closed at 3 and left, they wouldn't care if I went into the cafe after hours and took whatever I wanted and just paid them the next day. Security had been watching me do this and were going to have me arrested and fired, of course, and decided to bring in the police before even consulting with the people who ran the restaurant. They called them and they did not answer, and I thought I was cooked and going to jail. Luckily, she called back and gave them the all clear and told them to continue to allow me to do it. I always overpaid them on purpose for being given the privilege, so they didn't want that to end. I shot the head of security lady, the biggest duck you I told you so. Should have listened look I've ever given in my life. Felt good. Story 24. So I had a coworker who had decided she deserved my job at a truck stop more than I did. I basically ignored her petty and childish behavior while working with her. We both worked graveyards. One night, she tried calling in because she said her ride bailed on her. The manager working had me call my husband, but I was unable to reach him. So my sister-in-law went up to get coworker. Coworker was and still is my neighbor, and coworker told her no because she was adamant about not going to work. So manager sends one of the cashiers. They show up. Cashier and manager leaves, leaving me and coworker. So I was making myself a cup of coffee, and coworker decided she was gonna rip me a new one. Tell me all how my husband was a piece of crap, worthless, lazy, and selfish, and she was gonna give him a piece of her mind if he decides he isn't too big of a chicken to confront her. I ripped into her. I told her under no circumstances was she to ever talk about my husband the way she did, and she was to never speak to him like that. And I would beat her ass if she even looked at my husband wrong. It was an empty threat, but she didn't know that. Coworker decided to start calling me a Karen, a ducking retard, a piece of crap mother, etc. You name it. I walked away and she continued the barrage over the radio. I shut my radio off and called the manager from the restroom. Well, I misunderstood what the manager told me to do and never turned my radio back on. Our radios were the only way for us to communicate with each other. So I went through my shift, turned in my radio at the end, and left. I would be lying if I didn't say I flipped off the coworker once I got to my car. Next night, and I'm pulled aside by management. I'm at risk of getting fired for my behavior with coworker the night before. I told them I wasn't singing crap unless it was only for my radio being off. So my boss is launching an investigation. Lo and behold, one of the waitresses from the restaurant and the truck stop and a truck driver came forward and told my boss that she was bragging about potentially getting me fired and costing me the Employee of the Month award I was due to win. Because if she didn't get Adam, I didn't deserve it either. Coworker quit 2 months later. Boss came forward 3 months after coworker quit and told me she dropped everything because of the investigation. Story 25. I worked in a call center for an internet provider and website host. I literally told one of our biggest customers, I believe it was actually the biggest, the dude had a website and 10 internet links with us, to find another provider, since he was being overbearing and even said it was generally better just to pressure us, the attendants, instead of sending their own technicians to solve internal problems. Then, obviously, he said he wanted to talk with the manager, and I very respectfully denied this request, since I was doing my part of the protocol. Then, he threatened to call the commercial sector and talk to their manager himself. A little context here. The commercial was a crap. They're pretty much on the customer's side every single freaking time. I thought it was the end for me, but here comes the plot twist. The commercial indeed transferred the call to their manager, but he was busy and told them to just transfer to the CEO. And oh Lord, they actually did it. The CEO himself told the guy to find another provider. Story 26. I elbowed the coin the nuts whilst I was trying to get a box out that had gotten stuck. Did not realize he was behind me until I heard the pathetic whimper and the thud. Story 27. I was 17 working at a summer camp when a group of youth aged 13 were sent to my room to support. I had a group of 8 to 9-year-olds that were rambunctious. Things were going normally when several of the youth were sitting around and one of my kids were tripped. They all laughed and the kid bolted out of the room and then out of the building. One of the other staff went after the child while in a rage took all the youth into the hallway and began to cuss out every single one of them. I knew as soon as it dropped the first F-bomb, I would be talking to my super manager and probably fired, so I went in. To the point, one of the kids said, "You're gonna get fired, dude. You can't talk to us like that." And I responded, "I don't give a duck, as long as my child is safe and you duckers never do something stupid like this again." My super and manager spoke to me. I was honest and sincere about the situation, and they asked me to leave for the rest of the day. I worked with the company for 8 years after the situation, as a lead counselor in both the summer camp and school program. Story 28, I was being trained as a warehouse manager, and I ended up overstocking the warehouse. Seeing as how I worked on the floor and behind the scenes, I was constantly having to deal with customers that were upset because X product was sold out. To avoid doing that, I just tried to make sure that the most popular products were always in stock. The problem with that was that we never really knew how much business we'd be expecting. Some weeks, months were nuts, but sometimes it wasn't as good. It was unpredictable, so I just tried to make sure everything that we needed was available. The problem is that it started to add up, and before we all knew it, the warehouse was completely overstocked to the point where we could hardly get in or out. It took maybe 2 to 3 months before everything got back to normal, and by then a lot of products were expired. Seeing as how we couldn't sell expired products to customers, they were all either thrown out or shipped back to the main distributors. In the end, I cost the company thousands of dollars, but I wasn't fired or even yelled at. I owned up to the mistake and told my head supervisor that I wouldn't let it happen again. That's it. He pretty much just told me to use it as a learning experience and to prevent it from happening again. It's funny that he was completely calm/understanding with this, but I eventually found out that he lied to me for around 6 months. He regularly promised me that a raise/promotion was coming, mainly because of all the extra work I was doing despite holding the lowest paying position at the place I worked at. But I later found out that it was a lie, and there's a chance that I was actually being held back by him. Story 29. Flooded the store I worked at. I work for a cleaning company that gets hired to do daily cleaning at a certain chain store. Let's call it C. The store manager kept nagging me to fill up the water tank of the cleaning machine, scrubbing machine with built-in water tank and vacuum, after cleaning, even though I wouldn't have enough time for that. He wasn't the most pleasant person to work around, as he tends to be very intimidating and sometimes even aggressive. But that's a story for another day. One day, he called me into the office to complain about things that weren't in my job description. He wanted me to do his own staff's work. And because he stressed me out with it, I forgot about the water tank that was being filled. The next morning, I got a call from my supervisor that the entire store was flooded. Apparently, after I left the store, they just turned off the lights and locked up, so no one noticed the water was still running. I got an earful from my supervisor and was told to go to work as usual while waiting for what consequences the companies, CS and cleaning company, came up with for me. I feared for my job that day, as I wasn't sure how much damage my one little mistake had caused. If the water leaked to the wrong parts of the store, it could result in broken refrigerators and freezers, not to mention all the products in the stockroom, which I was told got damaged most. In the end, I had to clean the stockroom, make sure the entire floor was clean, and let the pallets dry. I ended up working on it for 6 hours and felt horrible the entire time. They thought of cutting my paycheck, but apparently the store's assistant manager saw how hard I worked and how much I regretted forgetting something so simple that they let me off by simply not paying for the 6 hours of cleaning the stockroom. I was mocked by the staff for a few weeks, which wasn't very helpful, but I just took it as punishment for nearly destroying their workplace. Story 30. I used to work in a fast food restaurant throughout high school. We have phones people can call us on and place an order. Sometimes we get complaints about something, so we usually get it sorted out in terms of refund or whatever. I remember one time some lady called and was very upset. We managed to mess up her order by adding ham to something that she didn't want ham on, and that this was for her son who just came back from college and he's so hungry. It was a sandwich with nothing but a piece of cheese and mayo, and she got ham on it. Okay, not a big deal. We'll refund it for a different time, so she can get something else for free, or if she wants to come back now, she can pick up a new one for free. But that's not good enough, because she won't buy from us again and she lives too far away. She then goes on to tell us how this mistake could have killed someone with a food allergy and whatnot. She then wants to tell me her life story and how McDonald's, a place barely even relevant to us, also messes up her orders and how it's so simple and whatever. So I tell her I'll get my manager to help her out. But she keeps talking about irrelevant stuff that's somehow supposed to make us feel bad. I keep trying to politely interrupt her, but she says, "I'm talking." So I hang up. She calls back and my manager picks up. She gives my manager the same speech. And to my surprise, she's a close friend of the owner, so in that case, I ducked up. My manager starts writing down something that I can see my name on while talking to the lady, and then a few minutes after, my manager throws out the paper. Apparently, the lady on the phone was calling everybody in the store retards, and that I teach retards that are smarter than you guys. My manager found out who it was and called her employer, who teaches special ed children. Story 31. Oh, I've got a great story. So, I make steel rope for a living. When I started, I had to start as a temp making only $14 an hour and on basically a probationary period on top of temping. It's a hard job. A lot of men quit after a few days. So I'm at the end of my probationary period and I'm running my stranding machine by myself. My trainer went to go to the restroom. No big deal. All I gotta do is make sure the strand I'm making doesn't pile up. Super easy crap. So the strands go on these steel reels that have notches in the top on some of them. They are bent all ducky. So you want to keep the strand away from the sides. So I'm watching this thing spin around, and in slow motion, it starts creeping up the side of the reel. I hit the E-stop next to me, but the machine takes several feet to actually stop. So even though it's slowing down, the strand is going over the side of the reel. It finally happens, and the reel ducking takes off. Boom! I run to the control panel, hitting every ducking red button I can find. Still nothing. It's ducked. The strand wrapped around the outside of the reel several times. It twisted off at the head and blew apart the die. The steel wires go through to form up the strand. Needless to say, the strand was ruined. We fixed it and to this day still get crap about it, guys. Busting my balls. It was the first time something like that happened as far as I know. I have a picture somewhere. I'll have to find it on my phone and I'll post it. Also, no punishment. Things happen and they kind of expect it. You do your best to avoid these things, but so long as nobody is hurt, they don't give you a hard time. Just fix it and explain what and why something happened to the best of your ability. Story 32. Second month on the job as a brand new apprentice electrician. My journeyman and I were out in a little volunteer fire hall installing an exhaust ventilation so the firefighters could run their trucks inside in the winter without opening the doors. Everything was on and running. Everything looked good. I just had to go around and close up junction boxes and covers and stuff. I was at the last motor, which was running as we tested everything, and I noticed the ground wire looked a little poorly attached, so I gave the screw, holding it on a twist. Well, I was right, but that made the ground wire fly off, short out across one of the phases and back feed down to the VFD, causing it to quite literally blow up in my J-man's face. Not hugely. He wasn't hurt, just scared the crap out of him. Well, he took it off the wall and tossed it in the van, and it was a pretty awkward ride back to the shop. I'm the first one in the next day, and I was sure I was going to be fired. Boss comes in and sees the toasted VFD on the table and asks what the duck was it about. I told him the story. He just sort of grumbles and says, "That's why we don't duck with stuff live if we don't have to," and goes about his day. I come to later find out that the J-man had told him everything already, and that if I said anything except just tell him what happened, he was going to can me, because everybody ducks up on occasion as an apprentice. But you can't keep guys around if you can't trust them. Bonus part. Once I got into third year and could do VFDs on my own, he basically made me install almost every VFD we came across, basically to tease me about blowing up that one. Joke's on him though, because I love doing motors and controls. Story 33. Mine's a happy one. I had called off Monday and Tuesday due to a depression spiral. By Wednesday, I just straight up told my boss what was happening. He told me to take the rest of the week off to feel better. Story 34. That day had me pissed, came into an already full dish room at 7 a.m., meaning they left them there all night. On top of that, I had to work a 14-hour day because both my dish people called off. That night, I freaked on my boss. Had not even had a break at this point, 10 hours in, when she came over and was like, "I need you to leave Dish Pit to do X, Y, and Z." So I asked her, "Who's gonna watch Pit?" She goes, "Well, you, of course." I freaked out. I started swearing I was being so loud the host out front could hear me clear as day, called her a dumb. Told her she's overworking me and can go duck herself. She tried to send me home. I looked her dead in the eye and go, "Well, if I leave, who the duck is gonna do my job? You? Ha! You would never come back here and get dirty. You don't do crap to help us. You think any of those line guys are HUing? They don't help unless they need something. So how about you leave me the duck alone and actually try and do my ducking job?" My head manager came over and goes, "You need a smoke break?" I'm like, "Duck, yeah, I do." I asked my other manager if they were gonna fire me. She goes, "No, you're too good of a worker." She straight up did not care that I had just cussed out her other manager at all. Apologized to me, and I went back and finished up my night. That was the same night I started looking for a new job. Story 35. This is a story I don't ever get to tell. When I was about 22, I started working at a phone company. While still in training, I had a bit of chemistry with a girl there. Long story short, on our lunch break, we go to a restaurant nearby and bang in the bathroom. The manager of the restaurant was red-faced when we walked out and said, "Never come back." He called my boss that day because he knew where we worked, as we had gone there a couple of times previously, best restaurant in the city, and was the only place we could get a modicum of privacy to do the deed. One of my mates at work told me the boss had called him in to ask about it to see if I bragged about it to confirm it happened. I figured they were going to fire me 110%, so I called up and quit on the phone to save the trouble. As I'm on the phone to my manager, and after I've given her my reasons that I had to leave for some important job I got offered, bullcrap, she said it's a shame because I was about to be promoted as I showed great initiative in the workplace. I thought she was just messing with me, so I called my mate the next day, and he said he got the job because I wasn't there. Turns out I ducked myself. Story 36. Used to work at a golf course in high school, early college. Most of the time in the middle of the day, it's very slow since everyone is on the course playing and range balls aren't picked till later on in the day. My coworker had some dry ice in the back of his car since he held a party the night before, and we decided to make some bottle bombs. For those who don't know, it's also a dry ice bomb. Put some water in an empty plastic bottle, throw in some dry ice, screw the cap back on and throw it. Eventually, the pressure builds up enough and boom. We decided to prep a couple bottles, and while we were doing so, a group came in from playing and they left one of those gigantic Gatorade bottles in the cart, the ones you can buy at Costco, etc. There was a new construction site just through the woods on one part of the course, so we headed over there and put the huge Gatorade bottle on the newly paved blacktop street, put the dry ice in, and ran away quick. After a few minutes, nothing had happened. So we figured the cap had leaked some, and we decided to just head back. As soon as we were through the woods, we heard boom. It sounded like thunder. It was so loud. We went back and the explosion from the bottle had blew a chunk of the black top off. We got back to the clubhouse, and the pro shop manager said someone called and reported a golf cart in the new housing development, and said if we went back again, we'd be fired. Nothing about the dry ice bombs, story 37. Was meant to be at work at 5 a.m., missed alarms, and woke up at 10 a.m. The other shift was starting at 9, couldn't get in, and called my boss, who had the store open before I got there. My boss's boss's boss came in at 1, walked past me on a smoke break, and asked what happened. Me. I could try to make up an excuse, but I slept in, plain and simple, slept through all my alarms. I'm really sorry, boss. Was expecting an excuse, don't let it happen again. Me. I'll do my best. Verbal warning. Opened the next morning, story 38. Okay, so I work in a fast food restaurant and only work a couple days a week because my mom drives. Well, she took a vacation, so I had to request the week off, otherwise I wouldn't have a ride. About halfway into the week off, I called and asked what my next week's schedule was, because it was already posted. The girl on the phone went and looked and said I was not on the schedule. At all. My stomach dropped 10 stories down. I was so afraid of being fired. As I loved having my own cash, living in a lower middle-class home, this was exciting, and enjoyed my job. Turns out, the GM made the schedule for the upcoming week instead of the normal manager who does it, and had just forgotten all about me. I was so relieved. Story 39. In the military, there are certain guidelines you're supposed to follow for repair of things in my career field. I'm in maintenance. We had an aircraft that was broken for roughly 3 going on 4 weeks. They did a dedicated team, 2 teams working 12-hour shifts nonstop, and it just so happened to fall on a 4-day weekend. I know a way to fix this, which is highly illegal, but either we'll fix the aircraft or blow out the channel in the tank and send it to a different section for repair. Day 1 of the teams, we laid about 10 tubes of sealing compound. Nothing. Day 2 of the teams, I said duck this and high pressure injected into a hole and fixed it instantly. I did this right as my lead decided to use the restroom. He comes back and asks what's up. I responded with letting him know I fixed the issue and it's holding pressure now. I explain how and he shrugs it off. The next thing I know, after we call it good, is 2 commanders, my shop chief, my pro super, and my squadron chief all walk right into the hangar asking questions. I explain as my shop chief is in horror. Commander looks over and says, relax, it's fixed. And instead of me getting paperwork of the highest grade, I received 2 coins from both the commanders. Getting coined is a form of award for exemplary skill. 1010 would high pressure inject sealant into a heavy beef up plate channel again. Story 40. First weekend on a business trip with my boss at a hotel, and she asked me to find out if we can use a private area for a conference call. I asked the front desk and the lady, we have a conference call we need to jump on. Is there a quiet space we can use? Sure, we have conference rooms. How long would you need it? Only a few hours. Sure, it's $350. Oh, wow. Great. What if we used it the whole day? Same price. So we used that room for 2 days. I'm checking out and notice a $900 charge. I, in my naivety, assumed she meant $3.50 per hour. No. $350 per day, plus $60 per day for water service, plus tips and fees. The hotel rooms themselves weren't even $300 a night. I checked out at 4 a.m., so I couldn't talk to anyone. I tried calling before my flight to straighten it out, but didn't get a hold of anyone. It was the only time I was on a plane that hit a lot of turbulence and thought, well, maybe it's not so bad if we go down, then I don't have to tell my boss. It was fine in the end. We work for a multi-billion-dollar company. But man, oh man, was I prepared to pay that out of my paycheck to keep my job. Story 41. I was putting myself through college and working construction and partying all the time. I showed up for work late almost every day by a few minutes, but one day came rolling in around 10 a.m., hungover as hell. His takes me with to Home Depot to get some stuff, then takes me out to lunch. He wants every gory detail of the night before. I oblige because I'm already canned, I figure. Her loves every minute of it. He lived vicariously through me, and I stayed on the job. It also helps that I worked circles around the rest of the crew, but still. After that, I started knocking out a day's work by 3 when we knocked off at 5 because I had other things to do than ride the clock. He just started showing up at 3:30 with a six-pack and pay me until 5. Great boss. Eventually worked a few years for him full-time when I realized I couldn't really spend the time I needed in the computer lab to do that work properly and pay rent. So I stayed in that town for almost a decade. I went back for a vacation and tried to get a beer with him. He asked me to come work for a few days. To hell with that, I was on vacation. Story 42. So 2x here, working as a bartender at a casino. First time was me staying up all night before a morning shift. Some of it only patrons I got. Ordered 3 buds I gave them. It got their cash rung. It in, then leaned up against the bar for what seemed like 4 seconds till me looked up. And the 3 I served were gone, and their drinks empty on the table, falling asleep at work. Second time, another boring morning shift, and to keep myself entertained while serving next to no one, I got my porter to fill up all the creamers. So when he brought all the bags of creamers, I got the bright idea of, instead of putting them away, I'm going to make a huge pyramid of them. This bad boy reached close to 4 feet tall, and then the phone started ringing. Not unusual employees call this bar to order their food, but then I looked at the ID, and it said, surveillance sub. I thought I was going to be fired for sure, for messing around like that, so I took some time to breathe. I pick up the phone and all I heard was multiple people laughing and the soup asking how much taller I could make it. But I told him I ran out of creamers, and that was as tall as it was gonna be. Then I heard all of them go, story 43. I was late, days in a row, like very late. One day I didn't set an alarm, or maybe turned it off without waking. The second time I was having car trouble. The third time I stopped because a woman was crying on the side of the road. Not crying like, grr, my day is crap and I am frustrated my car broke down, but like, my life is ruined and over. She said she was going to be late to a custody meeting and had no idea how it would look. I lied and told her I worked near where she was going, so I was about 1.5 hours late to work. I came in and talked to my boss, telling her, I swear I would do my best to be better and not be late. I knew my story sounded like nonsense, so I didn't tell it. Later, she calls me to her office and I sit down just thinking about job prospects and whatnot. The lady I'd driven to her custody meeting had phoned to thank me. She told her story to someone where I claimed to work, and they gave her our center phone number. My boss told me she appreciated my approach to taking responsibility and also that I would likely never have the opportunity to do anything as kind for a stranger again, but it was definitely the best approach to life. Story 44. I was working a conveyor belt unloading boxes. The person who was supposed to be taking my pallets away was working extra slow, so I had a completely full pallet and all my extra temporary hiding spots were full. Also, this story takes place around 4:30 a.m., so bear with me for the next part. I was so frustrated. The next box I picked up was light, and by the label it was something plastic, so I just whipped it off into the path meant for people pulling pallets. Over a dozen people saw me do this. Fast forward a couple hours, a coworker walks up to me and says our boss's boss wants to see me. All I can think of is, this is it, I'm so ducking done with this job anyway, I don't care, and this guy's a huge a-hole. I've wanted to tell off, so let's see how bad this gets. I'm in full anger panic mode at this point. He takes me into a private room and starts quizzing me on some basic shelf stocking info. Like, what does this and that part of the label mean? I guess they were considering having me go from temp to full-time. I ended up sounding like a stuttering git, barely able to get my answers out. I had so much built up adrenaline. Built up, I was almost shaking. They did eventually offer me the position, but the job was ruining my body, so I had to pass. Story 45. My work uses an old AS400 system that sucks. I hate it. So one day early on in my employment, I decided that I was going to write some macros to automate my work. I wrote out a nice little script to pull data for me, ran it, and brought the whole ducking thing to its knees. Suddenly, everyone was like, ugh, is lagging. I tried to kill it, but unfortunately, I didn't bother to learn how to do that. At this point, my macro was stuck in an infinite do loop, and eventually the whole thing went down for 4 hours. I did a reset on my computer to stop the script. I sat there crapping my pants while I waited for them to be fired, but it never happened. After about 2 weeks of not hearing anything about it, I knew I was in the clear. 2 years later, this guy from our head office was hanging out with me while I showed him a few basic things about how our VMs are set up for a piece of software they wanted to implement. We were casually talking about our early days with the company, and I casually mentioned that I one time got a macro stuck in a loop that I couldn't stop, so I had to reset my computer. And he deadpan looked at me and said, Something like that could pull the system down for half a day? Well, duck it. Story 46. 2 nights ago, I was sorting out the banking at work. Recently promoted and first few weeks doing so. I was given a pod full of cash and I put it in the chute to go to the office. Chute breaks, but I managed to fix it and get all the pods out, or so I thought. Checking it off and 1K is missing, and it is the pod I put in the chute myself. Purged the system and nothing else came out. Searched everywhere, thinking I lost it or I didn't put it in the chute. Basically, second-guessing everything I did that night. Distraught thinking I lost it. Call my manager to explain the situation. She says it's fine, don't worry. It won't be lost. It is probably stuck in the system. I get annoyed and upset thinking I'm ducked. I hit the chute, and out falls the pod. Story 47. I was working in a plastic factory straight out of the army. Plastic would be heated, molded, and cut from machinery in the form of lids for eskies. I would cut excess plastic off the lids by hand with a knife and let it cool and harden for about 3 minutes before throwing it into the shredder for recycling. My supervisor told me in a thick Viet accent, "Don't put cold plastic in the shredder." I just nodded and said, "Yeah, I get you." I had absolutely no idea what he said. I saw some excess plastic on the ground, about half a meter long, and threw it into the shredder. Before I knew it, the shredder started acting as if someone threw a brick into a clothes dryer. Shredder was about 6 feet tall. It started smoking and becoming very violent before my Viet supervisor came frantically running over to shut it off by an emergency stop button. Smoke started to engulf the area and machine. I thought I started a fire. The smell was like burnt toast or burnt food. I was 100% sure I was going to be fired right then and there, or at least never be called back in for work. I was a contractor. Nevertheless, I was called in frequently, moved around a lot in the factory, and became a favorite for the site. Story 48. It was my first week on the road for work. We do 8 days on the road at a time every other week, and I was out with 5 other people who were known to enjoy themselves on the road. We were staying at an embassy suite that has free drinks from 5:30 to 7:30. So we go down to have some drinks, and I decide I should try to keep up so as not to be the lame new guy. I end up having 6 doubles in an hour, and I was so full that I threw up my drink back into the glass after taking a sip, nearly missing one of my coworkers, who was the chief safety officer at the company, by the way. I decided to go upstairs and clean myself up, leaving them to clean up my mess. On my way upstairs, I see one of my coworkers riding the glass elevator down the atrium of the hotel, bare-assed for 8 floors. Keep in mind, it's 8 p.m. on a Thursday. From there, it was a hazy blur of baking in the hot tub for 3 hours straight, forgetting my room number and making the harrowing journey downstairs to ask the front desk and remember English well enough to form a sentence. In the end, I was fine, and the guy who was naked at the hotel got a promotion. Story 49. My first full-time job was quality assurance at a call center. At one point, they had me working the late shift, 6 p.m., 2 a.m. As you can imagine, this is a pretty uneventful job. Listen to the call, mark the checklist, send the report up, repeat. Because of the way the schedule was set up, one night a week, I was the only QA rep. It was a quiet room at a nice cozy temperature, perfect place for a nap. I remember one night looking at the clock, it was around 9, I was listening to calls and just put my head down, telling myself, it'll just be for a minute. I wake up to the customer service manager poking my arm, asking if I'm all right, and I groggily say, yeah. I looked at the clock, and it was past 10. I had been out for a solid hour or so. He asked me to join him in the small conference room, and I'm thinking, crap, this is it. He turned out to be incredibly understanding about it, and just wanted to make sure everything was fine with me in my personal life. I apologized and told him I was fine. I just was more tired than usual that evening. He said, this is probably the most boring job here, so I really can't blame you. Just don't let it happen again. Story 50. I worked at McDonald's. The job is what it is, but where I worked, patrons were usually not rude, and the coworkers were all nice. We're all in hell together kind of mentality, I guess. One time, these girls were being super rude and obnoxious on purpose. I have anger issues and started visibly shaking in anger. I started swearing in not English under my breath. They didn't understand what I was saying. Karen could barely speak English. But sometimes you can tell that someone is swearing from their body language. And these Karen were clearly looking to harass the employees and noticed that. So one of them goes, "Are you swearing in tongues?" And one of the managers was standing right beside me. I paled and looked at him, but he shook his head and told me to go to the back because he'd handle it. It's good to mention that he was used to being called slurs by drunk patrons. I guess the tongues thing got to him because he has a really thick accent. Later, he asked me what I was saying, and I told him that I'd said, "If you ate a small pile of crap, it'd be great," in Portuguese. He laughed, as did a lot of people who were listening. Eat a small pile of crap became an inside joke after that. Story 51. When I got my first job, it was the height of summer. It had been 90 or above every day for a couple of weeks. I worked at a movie theater where we had to wear long pants and a polo shirt. This wouldn't be a problem, but there was no air conditioning in the lobby, just in the theaters. My fourth day of work, I'm standing at the counter, no one else in the lobby. Everyone else was cleaning the theaters. I'm standing there and then I'm on the floor. I passed out standing up and smashed my face into a countertop. My eyebrow hit from blunt force trauma. No one noticed until a movie got out, and a customer, who was apparently the police chief a few towns over, saw me on the floor. No one could contact my parents for half an hour because my phone screen had completely separated from the rest of it in the fall. I had to get rushed to the hospital and get over 100 stitches in my eyebrow. At the time, I had no idea you couldn't get fired for workplace injury and was so convinced that I had just lost my job. I have the gross pictures my mom took of my eyebrow to this day. Story 52. Was working and living at a wedding venue, got dropped off by police crap-faced and covered in yogurt just as a wedding party arrived. Was literally hoses down but didn't get fired, at least not for that. Story 53. Was doing work for a difficult customer. Customer emailed several people within my company and theirs about all the stuff that went wrong in their perception, how it was all my fault, etc. They were actually unreasonable. Many things were not my fault, and some things were utter lies. I did a reply all and took out all the customer addresses from the to field and gave my view on the whole situation to my colleagues without getting nasty. I stayed professional, etc. Immediately got a call from my superior yelling at me. Apparently I forgot to check out the CC field as well, so my email went to some people of their company. Got called into the boss's office the next day. Was sure that I would be in trouble. Luckily, he wasn't upset at all. Agreed that this customer were total as holes, but I do have to be a bit more careful with the reply all button. Lesson well learned. Always check where your email is going to. When typing a new email, enter the recipients after writing the email. Story 54. I am in it. Just this once, I was deleting the data from a table using an in-house interface that sends queries to the database in the production environment. I clicked on delete. The system asked me if I wanted to delete the table as well. I thought it was a warning message asking if I was sure, and clicked yes. Everything was good. Cut to 1 hour later, the business analyst drops an email to the dev team that the users are not receiving any email. I was like, crap. Just for context, I am never quiet and talk a lot, but I was silent for a whole 2 hours while I created the table again, meticulously using the front end, which by the way is not that great, but it gets the job done. People asked me if something had happened, but I said, I'm just busy, nothing else. After I'd created the table, I went to my manager and explained what had happened. He stared at me and started laughing. I was literally going to cry, but it turned out it was okay. For all those wondering what the client thought, we resent the emails, so no one knew it was an error in the system. Story 55. So I destroyed $53,000 worth of jewelry at a store I worked at. Ill explain. We had a service elevator that went from the vault to the main selling floor, and every day we would load the jewelry into trays and load the trays onto the cart. Eventually, we got too much jewelry to fit on the cart, so we put the extra trays on top of the cart. As I am extricating the cart from the elevator, one fateful day, the wheels of the cart get stuck in the gap between the elevator and the floor, causing the 2 trays on top of the cart to fall hard on the floor with some pieces falling down the elevator shaft. My manager at the time was an angry Russian Bond villain who was never happier than when he got to yell at people. Only reason I survived summary execution is the sales manager who witnessed the whole thing saw. It was an accident and pointed out that everyone in the building, including him, loaded the trays on top of the cart too, and it could have happened to anyone. Story 56. I used to administer infrastructure grants. Typically, we would work with one state agency we were very familiar with. However, I was in charge of several projects for sidewalks through a different state agency where my contact at the state was very uncooperative. Also, the engineer was uncooperative, and neither wanted us to collect our fee. I was somewhat inexperienced, and I was sure I was going to tank millions of dollars in grants for these cities and that our company would be out our fee. That was probably $100K. Oh, and the grant writer that handed them over to me said that if I screwed them up, she was going to come back to town and wring my neck, literally. Although my boss seemed to think everything was cool, I was convinced I was in deep crap. So I walked a tightrope of explaining my actions to my boss, and the project progressed and tried to make the situation not seem dire. I woke up every day with anxiety, couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. It's actually part of the reason I left that job, but the projects turned out fine. Everything was cool. I didn't know what anxiety was until those projects. Story 57. Got to work 5 minutes late. Stupid traffic. I proceeded to head to my cell at the warehouse I worked at to pass out work for the pickers. Stressed with 20 people standing around me and frantically trying to organize my work for the day, one of the pickers yanked the work orders out of my hands with a, "Let me help you." I proceeded to lose my crap and instantly only see red. of which I yanked the stack of papers, about the size of dollar bills, folded into 2 albs of work rubber banded together. I then proceeded to throw about 10 bundles at people's heads like I was in MLB. Floor supervisor came running down yelling, "J. Trim, get the duck to the floor manager's office, now!" Of which I proceeded to yell, "I'm on my ducking way." Went to floor manager's office. He asked me what happened. He told me to take 5 and chill out. Then told me to go back out on the floor and work like it never happened. Most awkward 12 hours of my life. Stayed with the company for another 1.5 years before I left to move 2,000 miles away. Story 58. About 4 years ago, I had a company card. I found some things that the office used were cheaper on Amazon than through our usual stationery supplier, so used the company card to get them. Next time I went on Amazon, it remembered the last card I used and automatically put my order on that. Unfortunately, this was the company card. I should have checked this. It was a small amount, so I didn't realize it had come out of the wrong account until I did my monthly tally of spending on the company card, and I panicked to see this clothing order on there. I came clean to my manager, shaking as I told her, but she was okay and just asked me to pay the money back and we'd put it down to an honest mistake with no repercussion. Story 59. Worked as a detailer for Harley-Davidson for a bit seasonally. Hadn't rode before, no experience aside from a love of things with a motor and some good work ethic. After each wash, we'd push the bikes to the storage. First day, I dropped a 30K bike. I got better, but over the course of working there, I knocked over 7 bikes. Instead of firing me, they called me lucky since no bike was ever damaged. Note, I got much better at balance after this. Story 60. So I worked at a call center and I had been repeatedly 2 minutes late, probably about 4 times in 2 months, but they were really strict. So I was on my final warning before a disciplinary, and I was running late again. I figured I was done for, but then I remembered I was due to start 30 minutes earlier that day as I was working a Saturday, which was a shorter shift. I then remembered my boss said the only time he had been late was he forgot about said half an hour longer shift. In my desperation, I found a car park and waited 20 minutes and walked in 5 minutes before the time a normal shift would start. Then looked shocked when I got called into the boss's office. He had already pretty much decided I had just forgotten about start time, and I got away with it. Did eventually get fired a few later though. Story 61. So basically my job was looking at insurance policies for HNWI. Stuff like car collections, art, private jets, etc. Literally my first day out of training, I was trying to mark a policy as expired so that we could start a renewal process on it, but ended up deleting the client's entire file, which had insurance for close to 1.5 billion worth of assets. I was spamming Control+C thinking that was going to somehow fix this issue. Took me about 5 minutes to work up the courage to go up to my boss and tell him what I just did. He didn't even understand what I was saying because it was such a ridiculous duck-up. When he finally saw the entire portfolio missing, he freaked out a bit. Ended up just having to spend 12 hours doing some data entry from the physical papers back into the system. We were lucky though, because the physical policies get shredded every 6 months. If I had started working a month later and this happened, I have no idea what would have happened. Story 62. I work in the insurance industry. One of the most important rules is that you don't necessarily have to confirm with a customer if you're increasing coverage, but you absolutely do if you are decreasing it. One time we had to rewrite, place with a different company, a major client, a contractor. I was taking the lead and thought I had gotten everything okay in the new policy, and basically just told the owner that it was a smooth transition. Here come requests for proof of coverage for that client, and one of the most important coverages is missing. Putting it back in costs, another 1.5K, a not insignificant price hike. I called the client with shaking hands and could barely speak. I was so frightened by what his reaction would be. Fortunately, this was a long-standing relationship between our agency and the client, and the guy laughed it off and said to send him the bill, just so long as he had the coverage. I got a slap on the wrist rather than the pink slip I deserved. Story 63. I deleted a production database once. It was very bad news. The reason I didn't get fired was because the DBA involved should have checked the request with my boss first. I basically specified the wrong server. I was fairly new, and gave them the production instance rather than the dev instance. Dev would have required no authorization. The good news is it was backed up, of course. I was praised for owning up straight away, and procedures were changed so it wouldn't happen again. Made me feel sick as hell, though. Story 64. In college, I worked in customer service at a grocery store. Store policy says I'm not allowed to cash any checks over 1,000. This guy comes in after I close. Manager makes me open again and cash his check. I told him I couldn't because it's for $2,100. Manager initials the check and stands over me while I count. I was so angry and exhausted that I miscounted by a lot. My till was short that night. The owner of the store reviewed the tapes and saw that the manager on duty verified the amount I handed over. With his initials and approval of the amount, he was the one that got in trouble. Not me. He had to pay back the difference and refused to work with me again. I didn't do it on purpose, of course, but he was so angry with me. I said no multiple times and got nervous. My anxiety couldn't handle it. Story 65. I was upgrading a customer's database, after hours, during their downtime. The script to accomplish this was very old, written long before I joined the company, and I was just supposed to check the results. I ran the script, and it returned an error. I looked into it further, and the script had dropped a table without first copying its contents. In other words, I just corrupted a client's production database. I ducked and panicked and told my boss immediately. She got on the horn with the client to do some damage control. I thought for sure they'd can my ass. Here's the funny thing. Before these upgrades, we send a checklist to the client to prep the environment. They check everything off, sign it, and return it. However, this client had simply checked it, signed it, and returned it without doing any of those tasks. So when I ran the upgrade, their system ran out of space, causing the error. It was 100% their fault. I dodged a ducking bullet there. Story 66. Very recently, I made a financial mistake at work that could have been easily avoided if I'd been paying better attention. As soon as I discovered it, I panicked and assumed I was going to lose my job, which I happen to really love. I stewed over it for about half a day, and then decided to just go directly to my work and tell them exactly what happened and ask them how we could fix it, and it turned out to be really simple. It was a classic case where if I had just let it go, it could have been really bad for me. But because I took the initiative and apologized and tried to fix it, and it all ended really well. In fact, this was very recently, and I just had my employee review, and it was the most glowing I've ever received in my life. I really like my job. Story 67. My first job in it, on a service desk, talking to the head of equality and diversity in the hospital about why she couldn't access a website. Giving a really dumbed down version of what the problem was. The web filter has picked up that there was a violation of one of its policies, so had blacklisted the site. Proceed to tell her that it was blacklisted, which is for the bad sites, and it needs moving to the whitelist, which is for the good sites. Then, when logging the job, her profile picture comes up, and she's a black lady. Realized what I had said and wanted the earth to swallow me up. Nothing was ever said as it was correct in what I was saying, but from then on, I always referred to them as allowed list and blocked list. Story 68. About 2 years ago, I crashed and jammed a freight elevator. I work for a contract manufacturer, which means we build things for other companies, servers, baby dolls, cash registers, robots. We have a mezzanine for storing extra equipment when we don't need it between customers. I was working on pulling down a ton of rolling carts and racks and general stuff for a new customer setup. I jammed a bunch into the elevator and was maybe 1/4 inch over for putting the guard plate back in place and thought, duck it, I locked all the wheels. It will be fine. It was in fact not fine. I send the elevator down, and just as the bottom passed the bottom of the mezz, things shifted and slid. Some went under the mezz, some went above, and just completely jammed up everything. Loud bangs. I nearly crapped myself. I was nervous for the next week, just assuming they were doing the paperwork to lay me off. Story 69. I was a server, and after a particularly long, stressful week, this old man came in and berated me for everything. At one point, I just started laughed and said, dude, chill, and immediately went to find my manager. Turns out the guy wasn't even supposed to be in the restaurant anymore, because he always skipped on his bill, so my managers just ignored what happened. Story 70. I was moving between departments in my job. My old department had me leaving at so-and-so date, and the new department had me joining them at so-and-so date, 6 months apart. When I went to my new department, I was told by the admin guys to come back at the date I was meant to join and to go back to my old department. I never did, and essentially had 6-month fully paid time off. When I got back, I bumped into my old head of department, and he asked how I've settled in. I came clean and tried to make a joke about it, and his only response was, we all play the system, some better than others. Needless to say, I was never reprimanded for it. Story 71. I was new at a gas station, and everyone I worked with was super unhelpful and didn't want to teach me anything. I was at the register by myself and had all kinds of questions that no one would help me with. I eventually got so upset and fed up that when this customer asked if a decorative plate we had was for sale, I told her it wasn't, but that she could just have it. It was like a giant platter with a rooster on it that was store decoration. When my other coworker found out I did this, she was appalled and tattled on me. My boss didn't give a crap and said that the platter was ugly anyway. I really thought I was going to be in huge trouble though, haha. A person can only take so much before they start to give crap away for free. Story 72. I was a security guard on my second week. It was raining pretty hard, making a lot of mud. I dropped the keys almost as soon as my shift started. Couldn't find them. Had to call it in. Supervisor came to help me look. It was my main job to secure the gates, and for that I would need keys. She was talking about writing me up, but the manager decided against it. The dispatch that night never forgot and would bring it up to all the new hires. Story 73. I used to work with older adults with mental challenges. We would do chores together and cook together, Give them a safe home and help them live in it. One day I was taking my client to the laundromat in her complex. She was a bit unsteady on her feet, so I told her to wait at the stairs as I took the laundry up, then I would help her. She didn't listen and fell straight backwards on the first step, hit her head. There was a lot of blood. Everything was okay, and my bosses understood. I tried my best to keep her safe. I was terrified though. Story 74. My first job, I accepted a counterfeit money. This was a few years before the US 100s had that blue stripe, and they looked more similar to other bills I was seeing. And it was indoor go-karting during summer tourist season. We would see a lot of big bills, but this one was a clear fake. It looked like a $100, except for Lincoln's face. My boss came up to me later with the counterfeit, and I remember feeling the blood drain from my face. I thought I was going to be fired that day. Turns out his bosses weren't told happy that he hadn't been training his employees to spot fake bills. We didn't even have counterfeit pens. After that, we had a fraud detection blacklight machine. You put a bill into the slot, and it lights up all the identifying marks. Yay for learning? Story 75. I work on aircraft. I was doing something in the flight deck, and it was the middle of summer, so I opened the window. It was still open when I left the plane, and there were others working nearby doing their own thing. It went from a clear day to rainy in an hour, and some equipment was damaged. There were a dozen people who could have closed the window, but since I opened the window, I got the heat. I managed to avoid anything more serious than some paperwork simply because the people I work with had my back. Story 76. I ruined the clutch in the work vehicle. I suck at using stick shift, and before I started work, my boss was having a new clutch put in. Only took 3 months for me to ruin the new clutch. Boss was furious, thought I was going to be fired for sure, but I am still there. Story 77. I was a bartender at a chain restaurant and had an argument with a coworker. It was just words until he decided to throw sangria in my face. Well, that led to us physically fighting. I ended up finishing my shift, and the assistant managers informed me that I needed to come in the next day and talk with the general manager that was off when the fight happened. I come in fully expecting to be fired. Best case scenario, suspended for a few weeks. The conversation went exactly like this. I spoke with the regional manager, and we both agreed that he must have said something extremely offensive for you to act that way. We have let him go. So I wanted to talk to know about being in charge of staff events, organizing things like bowling and company trips. Story 78. Back in my high school days, I worked at a ski resort. As you might expect, teenagers plus snowball fights. One night we got a little carried away. I start ninjing my way through the rental department, picking off my coworkers, and then I missed one and hit a customer by accident instead. Oh crap. I confessed right away and apologized. The kid I hit didn't even care. He actually thought it was funny, but his mom didn't see any humor in it. She then complained up the chain of command and eventually to the GM. I was basically like, well, it was nice working with you all. But something weird happened. Nothing. I didn't even get so much as a scolding. To this day, I have no idea how I didn't get fired that night. Story 79. On my last day of working at a technical call center, I decided that I hated my job enough that it was worth creating multiple fake numbers to call and pretend I was helping someone. When supervisors would chat me and ask why they couldn't hear my calls, I would just put both phones on mute. I just told them I didn't know why they couldn't hear and that I was helping someone. I know it was my last day, but I swear I was terrified as crap that I was going to get caught and canned before the day was out. Man, that was a whole lot of effort just to expend very little effort. Story 80. I work as a server at a banquet hall. I was carrying 2 racks of glasses to the bartender on the other side of the ballroom to restock him during the event. I was carrying the racks on my shoulder. I put the glasses in the bar and put the empty racks on my shoulder to carry it back to the kitchen. I start walking back through the ballroom. All of a sudden, boom, I hit a guest in the back of the head with the empty racks and he nearly fell over. Luckily, the guy was a good sport and said, "It'll take a lot more than that to take me down." My boss saw what happened from the second floor, shrugged his shoulders and said, "Next time, don't suck." How did you get fired? Story 1. Working as a cashier. I missed a case of water underneath someone's cart, and turns out they were a secret shopper or something. I had a couple days off and I came back to look at the schedule and was told I was fired. Story 2. I already had a new job lined up, but it wasn't starting for another 2 months, so I was just trying to lay low and then give a 2-week notice. My old a-hole boss made one snarky comment too many, and I couldn't help myself. I put him on blast over some of his nefarious activities in front of our CEO. He fired me at the end of that week, but he was forced to retire a month later after everything I said was confirmed. I'm not exactly proud of it, but who am I kidding? Duck that guy. I explained the nefarious activities in another comment below. Basically, my boss and a customer, his friend, were scamming the company to fund a side business. Story 3 gave a spectacular demonstration of the top-heavy nature of a UPS truck. Rave reviews from locals, as the roadway was scattered with hundreds of packages. Management was unimpressed and suggested a different career. Story 4. Went to see Grateful Dead at RFK Stadium in DC. I told the manager not to schedule me that weekend, but he did anyway. Told him I wouldn't be there. When I returned Monday, I was fired. Worth it. Funny thing is, my wife, GF at the time, was also scheduled and went with me to the show. She wasn't fired, but she quit when she found out I was fired. Daryl's Restaurant in Raleigh, NC. By the way, they had some pretty good food. Story 5. I took on a role that was not fit for me. It was my second job as a software developer, and the role was dev number 2 at an early-stage startup. As in, the entire dev team was me and another engineer. Startup life can vary greatly, but this was a financial tech firm near Wall Street. To say that it's a lot of responsibility is an understatement. There's no such thing as saying, "That's not my job," or "I don't know how to do that." If the company needs it, you have to do it. It was a good learning experience because I was pushed very far outside of my comfort zone, but it also gave me crippling anxiety, and I got burnt out. I made a bunch of mistakes and was eventually fired over it. The job was so hard that I was actually relieved to get fired. Story 6. I refused to lie to our biggest customer about a project that was costing them $80 million, but just didn't work. I got the briefing for this while on my flight to that meeting. I said, "I cannot mention certain things, but I won't lie if they ask for specifics. The crap you want me to say to them doesn't even exist and probably will never exist because it's just not possible." When I landed, I got a call from my boss telling me that I don't need to go to that meeting because he has taken over. I should just go out and have a nice day in Calgary instead. I did, and the next day he fired me. But I asked right away if I could still fly out to Bangkok the week after and train the people over there. I didn't go to Bangkok. Story 7. I was overloaded with work, and so I was also put in charge of a new guy. Well, I taught the new guy everything, and he did great for a while. Until he didn't, and he kept missing things, and I got blamed for it. The boss kept getting mad at me like it's my job to manage. I had a job. It just so happens one person is not enough to pick, package, and ship out 150 plus separate orders a day. But apparently that's how they like it because he wasn't hearing it. I careened him out about how it's not responsibility to watch over every move the guy makes. Otherwise, I wouldn't have time to work, and he'd get mad at me again. So yeah, careened him out, then simultaneously quit and got fired. Story 8. Pretty sure they were just wanting to get rid of me. I was working at a meat market deli store, and I was called on my phone after work hours by the owner to tell me he was letting me go because I upset a customer that day. It was Saturday, which were just half days, but incredibly busy. An older man and his wife had ordered something chicken, so I wrapped it up, priced it, and gave it to them to take to the register. Well, he tells me he wanted the breaded chicken whatever. I say, "Oh, sorry, she didn't specify breaded, but I'll get you the correct chicken." I unwrapped what I gave them and put it back in the case, throw away the wrapping paper, and do it all quickly because there were people waiting in line. So I get the breaded chicken wrapped and priced and hand it back to them. The wife asks, "Is this the chicken whatever?" And I say, "It's the breaded chicken whatever." I swear I didn't say it with nasty tone, just affirming that it was breaded. Well, the husband gave me a dirty look and they leave. Well, the owner calls me later that evening to fire me because he was pals with that old guy. I file unemployment. The owner fights, and I guess he tells the agent what he thinks happened. Because when the agent called me, I was telling him my side and the agent, and he tells me, "Well, the owner said you did this thing and that," and I tell the agent, the owner wasn't even there that day, and him and that customer were friends. I think that sealed it in my favor because I got approved. Story 9 was working in McDonald's 2 years ago. I was the dude who was responsible of the fries. One evening, this dude comes in asking for a regular order of a burger and fries. We serve him accordingly. Next morning, he comes in screaming about how the fries he ordered yesterday were soggy and demanded to speak to me. By the state of him and his face, he had clearly been drinking the night before. I went up to him and he started screaming at me. I started by apologizing, but then after him screaming at me, for 10 minutes, I started defending the fries I'd made. He said, "Do you think I'm lying just to get a refund? I just had the fries before coming here, and they were soggy." One of the other staff members who was working the till recognized him from the night before. Turns out he had left the fries in his car the whole night while he was out drinking and still expected them to be fresh and crispy the next morning. I lost it and kicked him out. 2 hours later, the owner of that franchise comes in and fires me for kicking his nephew out of the place. All the other staff members were on my side, but he threatened to fire them as well if they had a problem with his decision. The place closed down because they couldn't find people to work there, as the owner kept firing people for petty reasons. Story 10. I came back from holiday and was jet-lagged due to the time difference, and therefore I got tired towards the end of the working day. My tiredness was taken as an inability or unwillingness to do the job, and I was marched off the premises. Story 11, missed work for a whole week to be tested for cancer. Didn't have cancer. It was an autoimmune disease, but the manager at the store said I was unreliable and distracted. Well, yeah, I was being tested for cancer. Story 12, got a summer job that required me to live on site in a remote area. Told my part-time job that I would be gone for the summer and marked up the calendar accordingly. They told me it wasn't a problem. About halfway through the summer, they fired me for not coming into work for the past month. When the summer was over, I showed them the calendar and reminded them how we had discussed this and I was reinstated. Just stupid, the story 13. From 1980 to 1982, I was the publications director at a college. I always got very good, outstanding ratings from my supervisor. One day she came in and did my review. As usual, all ratings were in the top 2 performance categories. Then she told me she was letting me go, but offered no explanation. She actually patted me on the head and said, "I want you to know it's nothing personal. And if I had a daughter, I'd want her to be just like you." I was very young, 25, and newly married, and as she was aware, my husband was a graduate assistant making $3,500 a year. I closed the door to my office and sobbed. It took me a long time to get another job. I was a week away from running out of unemployment benefits when I finally got hired elsewhere. I found out later that she routinely fired people in that position after a year. I held the job longer than anyone. The woman who fired me was a psychopath. She would rearrange my office while I was on vacation. When my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer and had to have a mastectomy, I asked to take a few days off to go out to help her. I had plenty of vacation time, but my boss said she would be out of town for a week and someone had to hold down the fort, so I had no choice but to stay. My boss was in the office all that week. About a year after I got fired, I got a call from a woman who said she had just been fired from the same job. Story 14. I got signed on as a territory sales rep for an auto financing company. Dealerships would send in applications for customers, and I would help them and make exceptions on the deals to get more of the market share. The territory I was signed on for was where I did my period of selling cars, so I knew everyone in the area and was confident I'd do amazing. I let them know beforehand that I was heading into this role, and people were excited. We don't be training and yada yada, and I get released into the wild with a list of dealerships that are active in my territory and start to work on signing people up. I only had access to the list of dealerships that were in my territory that were active under me. I couldn't see anything that was under anyone else, and I couldn't see anyone that wasn't signed up. I spoke with Dealer A, got the paperwork, sent it in. Except Dealer A was already signed up apparently. They had no idea. Turns out it was a legacy account from some guy in the next territory over. Okay, it happened same thing with Dealer B, C, D, E, and on and on. None of these people had ever met this man, and they wouldn't give me the accounts because he was one of the long-term employees. I just tell my boss to give me a list of the dealerships in the area that are already signed up because I'm getting really pissed off at this point. 70% of the ducking territory is sitting inert and rotting while this man does nothing with it. All of my connections are useless. I'm left with the scraps of a hollowed-out area to try and hit a massively increased target because I said I could do it based on my connections. I emailed my boss, basically going off on him and telling him this is completely unacceptable. And the reason I agreed to these targets and took the job was because of my connections that are now useless due to him not knowing what the duck was going on at his own company, worded professionally. He says he'll look into it. So I told him I'll do what I can, but there's 0% chance of me hitting any of these targets, and he needs to do something about this. The best part is that this man has also been going into my territory now to sign up dealerships. My friends called me and said he came in and pitched this company to them, and they showed him the door, saying they want to deal with me and they're already signed up. At this point, I know I'm done with this company. Duck this. But if I quit, I get nothing. So I decided I was going to get fired and collect employment insurance. Emailed the boss and demanded to know what he's going to do about this, and sat and sat and sat. I stopped going out and just started calling like 5 people a day to justify a work day. Eventually he calls, says he's sorry, but they're going in another direction. I laugh and tell him yes, that's been apparent for a while now. Story 15. I told the manager that she was an entitled, pompous, self-centered, mentally ill bully who was also almost certainly bipolar. Got fired within a couple hours. Story 16. I used to work at a regional internet service provider. My whole time there, policies and procedures grew increasingly strict. Every time we had an outage or another type of incident, our higher-ups would freak out and make our change management procedures stricter. It got to the point where simple network maintenance tasks needed a couple workdays of planning paperwork before the tasks could begin. To be clear, I was unhappy there, in part because of how restrictive it had become. One night, after hours, while I was on call, a call came in. A new customer couldn't get their service turned up. The problem was quickly obvious. Some change management paperwork had fallen through the cracks, and equipment I was responsible for hadn't been set up in advance as a result. I opted to configure the equipment on the spot. The customer wanted to be online. I wanted the customer to be online. and I had the console right in front of me. So I entered the changes, logged off, and went back to bed. Except I made a typo, and the typo got committed to the database, and it triggered a rolling blackout that started to slowly take down about 200 or so residential customers. What's more, I didn't tell any of my teammates that I made the configuration change, so they had no idea what happened. When I got to work the next morning, I started to hear whispers of a problem circulating. Those whispers grew louder throughout the day, prompting me to eventually circle back around and check the changes I made. Well, I found my typo, and I panicked, fearing that I would get fired if anyone found out that I'd broken procedure and made the change. I fixed the typo on the spot, and again, I didn't tell anyone. After all, I was panicking. Well, eventually, the way the cards fell, I had to fess up. When the 30 or so out of 200 residential customers that went down just inexplicably got their service back, they came looking for the reason why. Ultimately, at least on paper, I was fired for my failure to communicate with my teammates, not my failure to follow procedure. Well, after a few frightening months of being unemployed, I was eventually picked up by another, far less toxic employer and have been far happier ever since. Story 17. Laid off the week after I told my boss I was burned out and thinking about quitting. She told me not to quit, to wait it out a bit. I guess she knew layoffs were coming. It was great. I got a decent severance and unemployment benefits. I took a few months off and started doing stand-up comedy. Found a new gig and I love it. Story 18. I worked for a company that tried to grow too fast in an expensive location. In my department was me and another girl that the boss wanted to bone. It was a travel job that was predicated on upselling locations and amenities. We had a monthly sales quota in dollars, and my boss hated how I met goals. Rather than bleeding every person I spoke to, I would assess their needs and only offer what they wanted and could afford. He viewed this as cherry-picking whales, even though he was directly responsible for which leads went to each of us. Whereas my counterpart, a lovely woman with whom I became friends, was more of a hustler. She would upsell a higher percentage of clients, but with fewer upgrades at lower price points. We both raked in equal sales, but mine usually stuck better BC, they didn't cancel. Selling the sizzle of a filet mignon is pointless to someone who can only afford chopsteak. The people that can afford filet walking in the door just need to choose if they want to garnish it with white or black truffles. The month prior to getting fired, my boss freaked out and threw a water bottle through a wall in a meeting with me, had it patched and painted an hour later, and the next day, we had a new policy. I already knew he was dialing out based on the water bottle incident and the fact that he was leasing a building he couldn't afford and the many layoffs below us. He presents our department, the two of us, with a new agreement to sign stating that now, sales quotas would be based on quantity per month over actual revenue. As soon as he left with signed docs, I turned to my partner and said, well, that's how he is firing me. I never missed a quota in my entire employ, but the quantity was going to kill me. So the following month, I stayed the course and sold slightly more than usual, but did not squeeze the little guy as expected. Fired. He only needed one of us, and I was married and happy. Even my partner's BF told her it was good that we were friends, while anyone else would have despised her in the same position. Wasn't her fault this guy liked to dip his ink. She was fired a month later when she couldn't handle the whole department alone and freaked out at him one day. Good times. Story 19. I wasn't a good fit after working at the company for 3 years. Was told a few days after getting fired that the head manager's daughter was given my position. Because of getting fired for absolutely no reason, I had to go on welfare for 6 months and was almost homeless because I couldn't afford rent anymore. Also starved regularly, as welfare was only $700 per month and rent alone was $650. For a bedroom, had to leave my apartment because rent there was almost $1,200. Story 20. I got free tickets to see a British thriller horror type film called Donkey Punch and emailed a friend to invite them to see it. Turns out the phrase donkey punch flagged up to it. My very conservative boss got an email, dragged me into a meeting, and got very cross when I just laughed it off. Wouldn't listen to any logic or reason. Had a printout of the definition of donkey punch in front of her. Suspended me for 2 weeks with pay, then fired me. Film wasn't that good either. Story 21. I was once fired from a grocery store. I had worked there since the day the store opened and was the only one of the original crew that was left. The boss had told me several times that I was his most trusted employee and that when I was in charge of the night shift, I worked nights 90% of the time. He had nothing to fear. One day, I suddenly got accused of stealing a small amount of money from the safe in the office. They called in an investigator who was one of the most condescending and unpleasant people I've ever met. He refused to look at the security cam footage, refused to listen to what I said, and just wanted me to confess to the crime I'd committed. Right afterwards, I sent in a complaint. And a few weeks later, I got an apology letter from the head office. They were sorry that my case had been handled so badly, it was full of errors, and the investigator had supposedly been reprimanded for his behaviors. and none of it would be added to any criminal record. But I was still fired and had to pay back the money they claimed I took. Later, one of my former colleagues told me that she had found out that the boss of the store had originally been fired from his previous job, and he had involved his wealthy dad and lawyers to get his papers to say that he quit by himself. The whole thing looked very shady. When he was confronted with this, he turned pale and refused to discuss it. Every time I happened to see him out in the wild afterwards, I would say hello and wave at him. Not out of spite or anything, he always seemed very uncomfortable. He would stoop over and almost run away. When my closest family would visit the store, he would run off and hide. Just a few weeks after I got fired, it turned out that he quit. I cannot say for sure that any of this was connected, but according to what I've understood from others, there was something rotten going on in that store. Story 22. I was fried for suspension of theft. I was a shopping cart pusher, and someone left their bank bag. I didn't see it when I pushed it up, and they said I was trying to steal it instead of just overlooking it. Best part was they were escorting me out, so I didn't steal anything else. And an old woman came up to the manager, walking me out, and said she lost her cane. Manger looks at me like, "Did you steal this too?" Since the whole thing was so crazy, anyway, I just took the opportunity to look suspicious and sprinted out of the store like I was guilty. Because of his weight, he couldn't really run after me. And Mr. Manager, man, couldn't follow me into the parking lot for laws. So I walked to my car laughing my ass off. I'm okay with losing that job. I'm at a much better job now anyway. So it all worked out, and I have a great story from it. Story 23. Got hired as a salesperson. As someone who'd only done passive sales but wanted to try active sales, I informed them that I do not have any experience with proactive finding new clients. They said it's no problem, and that during my 3 months trial period, they'd help me shape my skills, will want no results, and teach me everything I needed to know. Got fired 6 weeks later because they didn't have time to teach me and I didn't have any result on my own. Story 24. I knew I was irreplaceable. I knew I could call in so I could stay home and play World of Warcraft all I wanted. What were they gonna do, fire me? They couldn't fire me. I was 20 years old and knew everything. They had a different opinion. Story 25. They cut some positions because we were operating with less seats due to COVID restrictions at the time. Basically, every occupied table had to have a blocked, empty table separating it and other occupied tables, and they had to be surrounded with plexiglass. They had 2 kitchens, a bigger dining room kitchen, and a smaller lounge kitchen. They closed the smaller lounge kitchen because of the seating thing, but then they put tables in the courtyard so we can seat more. Then it started to get busy. They kept the same structure. I'd usually be scheduled to start in the middle of happy hour and work through dinner until close. For the first 3 hours of my shift, there would be 3 people in the kitchen, 1 person on salads, desserts, cold appetizers, 1 person on hot appetizers, and doing some steamer oven stuff for the grill side, and 1 person doing grill, saute, plate, cutting prime rib. As you could imagine, it was busy right from the start. I would get a bill, and as I'm getting the stuff cooking, more bills would come in, and then I would put more stuff in, and even more bills would come in at that time. After a while of this, I started to get burned out and feel really negative about that job. Then they hired a new guy for me to train. Then my hours started to decrease. Then I was called into a meeting where I was terminated, but in a nice way, where they said I could use them as a reference, and if I need help finding a new job to let them know. They did give me severance, but it was pretty ass for the 4.5 years I worked there. Before that, no manager would ask me if I was okay or if I needed help, and a few weeks before that, I got a performance review where my kitchen manager said I improved a lot since the last one and even ran up to the office to try and find the old one and gave me a decent raise. The same manager that fired me was the same one who yelled at me because my food came out late because I was solo on my station, open to close, on a Saturday night when I'm supposed to have a second person helping me. Story 26. I'm a single mom with 3 kids. I had 2 deaths in the family back to back, then my kids got sick. I missed about 2 weeks in total of time over a span of 9 months. They demanded I get help with the kids, asking me where the father was, explained that he's not around, filed a complaint to HR about them asking me that, and also denying breaks, and got fired. BCHR was a friend of my supervisor. It was a terrible job. Story 27. I was 19 and asked the wrong question. I was working in a call center way back when long-distance plans mattered. Second weekend, I kill it. Hit the top of the weekly sales. Nice little bonus, all good. Next week, I can't close for crap. I'm at the bottom. List seems stale people that we've called before. I'm pitching this one lady, and then she says she just switched to our plan, describes the rest of the pitch. Only the name of the company was different than ours. Otherwise, exact same plan. I was young and didn't really care beyond a paycheck, so I went to talk to my boss. He says there are a lot of long-distance plans out there. Don't worry about it. Next few days, lots of similar calls. I also noticed the manager's room had a duck ton of phone books from other states. Asked about that. End of the week, I was canned for performance. Next Monday, they got raided by FCC and FBI. Turns out they were reselling folks the same plan over and over again under a different name. They were also illegally pulling names from phone books and overselling the amount of long-distance time they'd actually bought, so people were getting overcharged. Story 28. I had a crap office job and a support role to the sales team. The majority of the office was awesome. My role was to help generate market reports for the top producers. I, working as a team of one, was asked to put something together that every office of our competitors had 3 to 4 people for. As a result, I used a lot of Python to automate database pulls and Excel creation. My favorite example is we had to take Excel reports we were given from another group into a database. I had a zombie script that made it look like I spent a day uploading them while I actually did nothing. I've reached out to a few friends there and no one knew anything about it, so I don't think that is why I got fired. I was paid well below market rates, doubled my hourly pay at my next job. One guy wanted everything in Excel, and I told him that was impossible. A lot of it had to do with data manipulation and turnaround time. 3 hours for a report that took minimum 10 hours to load. The guy one time asked me in a meeting if I was leaving this week or next, when I hadn't interviewed for another job or was planning to leave. I started the process of applying to other jobs shortly after. He hired the manager and slotted me under the new person. The new manager was nice, but she wasn't technical and wanted to do everything manually. She would say that what I did was impossible and would get super frustrated when I could do things faster than her with fewer mistakes. Anyway, she fired me because I used Python to generate reports. I was never told my work was subpar. I was never given a verbal warning. I was never given a written warning. A few weeks after I was let go, I was asked to show her how the program I wrote worked, and I sent an invoice for $5,000. Haven't heard back since. Point of the story, don't work for dumb people. Story 29. I kept eating food when I just cooked it at McDonald's and giving everyone 2x the amount of nuggets/chicken fillets, etc. Duck that place, it's a depressing nightmare. Story 30. Worked at Walmart. Me and several other employees were forced to give what was supposed to be a confidential statement on a store ethics investigation after numerous anonymous complaints to corporate from, I assume, several employees. For some reason, they allowed a store investigation to be headed by the CM instead of an impartial third party, even though the CM was the root of every problem I could imagine someone making a complaint about, and said left all the statements sitting out rather than locked up like is standard procedure. My manager, who was mentioned heavily because she's a horrible person, found it and started going after me. Long story short, after about a year of targeting, I had a mental breakdown at work, and they tried to fire me for time theft because I was having panic attacks in the bathroom. Since management was aware of my pre-existing panic disorder, corporate warned my SM that firing me would open them up to an ADA lawsuit, so they gave me like a week to find a doctor, get in to see them, make them aware of my situation, and have them fill out ADA accommodation paperwork, which of course is an impossible timeline. Or I'd lose my job because they gave me an opportunity to save my own ass. Well, not a single doctor in network was accepting new patients, and I got canned on Valentine's Day. Then to boot, I got denied unemployment after management straight lied to the investigator about pretty well everything. But that's not surprising, given Walmart is near impossible to get unemployment benefits from best thing that ever happened to me, and I haven't had more than a mild anxiety attack since, which is the longest I've gone in almost 3 years. And I'm not even medicated since I lost my health insurance with my job. Story 31. For having a MySpace page back in the day where I'd written some rantings about various subjects, some of which included cuss words. HR found out about it through the friend of a friend of a friend of the HR director's son, who, being an upright, moral Christian teenage boy, showed it to his father, who, being an upright, moral, example-setting man, decided to make an example of me by firing me. I was instructed not to speak to my former coworkers when I went to get my things, and they were not allowed to speak to me either. Even if I was in public, like at Walmart or something, I was not to speak to them. They were not to speak to me in public or about me at work, and if they were found out, they would also be fired. Story 32. I was working as an associate manager at a print shop managing the tech dev. The new manager came in and promoted this a whole to her assistant and started going after every person she didn't like. She had him go through computer files and found one of our sales guys' resumes and asked why I had worked on it with him. I said, because he asked me too. I charged him the normal rate for services, gave him his employee discount. Here are the receipts. They pushed that I was aiding someone leaving the company, which wasn't a fireable offense. So they then said they had heard from somehow I was gossiping about the manager. I pushed back and said, well, isn't your proof of this actually gossip? They fired me for gossip. I called the regional manager who I had a good rapport with. He said, I can't get you the job back, but if you want a different job, I can find a spot for you. If you want to move on, have them contact me for a reference. You left voluntarily as far as I'm concerned. I was getting ready for my wedding, which was 2 weeks away. I told him I would find something else and take this as an unplanned vacation. Came back from my honeymoon. Got a handful of interviews. New job within 2 weeks. Found out a couple months later, both the two a-holes were fired as they got caught literally having sex in the office. Story 33. I trusted a coworker not to report to our boss. He asked me if I see myself doing the job long-term and told him no and that I'm probably going to look for something else. But I'll stick with it for now. Within a week later, boss calls me to his office, has me close the door behind me, and says to me that they're letting me go. Lesson learned. Lie to your coworkers no matter what. I probably would have at least gotten more income from that job had I not thought people were decent like I always make the mistake of doing.